The tension in the air was thick as the lights dimmed and the spotlight fell on the stage of the Truth Unfiltered, one of the most watched talk shows in the country. The audience buzzed with excitement, eagerly awaiting the night's guest. A man whose name had been synonymous with resilience, strength, and Hollywood legend for decades. Sylvester Stallone, the iconic star who had taken on countless challenges on the big screen, was about to face a challenge of a different kind. This time, not from a villain, but from a reporter who thought he could get the best of him. The crowd cheered as the curtains opened, revealing Stallone in his usual rugged yet charismatic style. His iconic presence undeniable. He stood tall, his broad shoulders and confident posture as commanding in real life as they were on screen. But as he walked to the center of the stage, there was something different in the air tonight. A feeling, an undercurrent of suspense, that something unexpected was about to unfold. As he sat across from Gregory Turner, the talk show host, the room grew tense. Gregory had built a career on his sharp, calculated questioning, always looking for a response that would spark controversy. His smirk was ever present as he prepared for what he thought would be another easy, polished interview. Gregory's eyes glinted as he leaned in, ready to ask the question that would set the stage for what he thought would be a memorable moment. "Sylvester," he began, his tone dripping with mock politeness, "you've been an icon for decades. But let's be honest, your recent roles haven't really lived up to the legacy you built in the Rocky and Rambo films. Isn't it time to step aside and let the younger generation take over? Where do you stand in all of this?" The room fell silent. Everyone waited for Stallone's response, knowing that Gregory's words were meant to challenge the legend. This wasn't just a simple question. It was a calculated jab, meant to provoke, meant to tear down the image of a man who had been a hero on screen for millions. The spotlight shifted to Stallone. His gaze was unwavering as he looked across at Gregory, unfazed by the challenge. The audience, unsure of how the actor would respond, held their breath. What was going to happen next? Could Gregory, the sharp-tongued interviewer, get under Stallone's skin? Stallone took a slow breath, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly as he spoke. "Gregory," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight, "you think the measure of a man's worth is how loud he shouts or how many times he's been on screen. Well, maybe you should look a little deeper." Gregory raised an eyebrow, intrigued by Stallone's response but confident that the interview was still in his control. "Come on, Sly," Gregory smirked, leaning forward. "The world wants to know if you finally accepted that maybe your time is over, that it's time to pass the torch." Stallone leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You think passing the torch means stepping aside? That's where you're wrong. It's about standing tall. It's about taking every punch life throws at you and standing up again. And when the world tries to count you out, that's when you rise. That's when you show them why they were wrong." The room was silent now, the audience hanging on every word. Stallone's response wasn't just a statement, it was a challenge to the media, to those who believed they could diminish his legacy. The tension between Gregory and Stallone was palpable. But just as Gregory opened his mouth to retort, something shifted. Something that no one, not even the most seasoned reporters, could have anticipated. Gregory paused, his smirk faltering as he took in Stallone's unshakable presence. For the first time, the tables had turned. Gregory was caught off guard. His own questions now seemed insignificant. The silence grew longer as Stallone's unyielding confidence filled the space between them. And then, Stallone's voice rang out again, but this time, it wasn't just a response. It was a statement that would leave Gregory speechless. "You see," Stallone said, his eyes piercing into Gregory, "it's not about trying to keep up with the next big thing. It's about showing everyone that when you've got grit, when you've got heart, you don't have to scream for attention. You don't have to beg for respect. You earn it. And I've earned every ounce of it." The room, once filled with tension, suddenly felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Gregory had been expecting to steer the interview, but instead, he found himself at the mercy of Stallone's quiet yet overpowering strength. The audience's reaction was immediate. Applause erupted, their respect for the actor palpable. Gregory, now visibly shaken, was left without a rebuttal. The sharp-tongued interviewer had been outclassed by Stallone's unwavering calm and authority. For a brief moment, Gregory opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The veteran actor, the one who had faced countless battles on screen, had just dismantled the reporter's bravado without even raising his voice. Stallone's message was clear. His legacy wasn't defined by his past roles. It was defined by the strength and wisdom he had accumulated over a lifetime of challenges, both on-screen and off. And in that one moment, he had reminded the world that true power isn't about dominance. It's about presence, respect, and unwavering confidence. As the tension in the studio continued to simmer, the show's atmosphere had completely shifted. Gregory Turner, the host who had prided himself on his sharpness and wit, now found himself caught in a whirlwind of disbelief. He had expected to rattle Stallone, to push him into a corner with his calculated questions. Instead, the tables had been turned so decisively that Gregory could hardly believe it. The cameras panned over the stunned faces of the studio audience. There was a palpable shift in the energy, a growing sense of admiration for Stallone. He had not only handled the confrontation with ease, but had left Gregory floundering, unsure of how to continue the interview. It was a moment that no one in the room would soon forget. For a moment, Gregory sat in silence, trying to regain his composure. The audience waited, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. Gregory, feeling the pressure, took a breath and tried to reassert himself, but he couldn't quite find his footing. His usual banter had failed him, and now he was on the back foot. I wasn't expecting that, Sly," Gregory finally stammered, trying to recover. "You've got quite the way with words. But let's move on. Everyone wants to know, what's next for you, now that the movie career is, well, a little quieter? What are you doing with your time?" Stallone leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Gregory. There was no rush in his demeanor. The earlier tension had dissolved, and what was left was the quiet authority that seemed to emanate from him. "I've always had my hands full, Gregory. You know, I'm not just about movies," Stallone replied, his voice calm but purposeful. "Life, real life, doesn't stop when the cameras are off. The truth is, I've got a few projects that are personal, things that matter." Gregory, sensing an opportunity to get Stallone to open up, leaned forward again. "Personal? Like what?" he pressed, his voice a little less certain now. The audience was on the edge of their seats, sensing that something big was coming. But instead of answering immediately, Stallone gave a slight smile, a knowing smile, one that wasn't just about his career. It was a look that spoke volumes. "I'm focused on helping people," Stallone said, his tone shifting. "There are always battles that need fighting, but not all of them are on the big screen. I've been working on charity projects, focusing on health, veterans, and families, giving people a chance, making sure they know they don't have to fight alone." The words were simple, yet they carried an immense weight. The focus was no longer on his Hollywood legacy, but on something far deeper, more meaningful. The shift from the flashy lights of the entertainment world to the quiet work of helping others seemed to take Gregory off guard. For a moment, there was no response from Gregory. His sharp questioning had lost its edge in the face of Stallone's sincerity. He had expected to pry, to expose, but what he had instead uncovered was something far more powerful. A man who wasn't just a hero on screen, but one who carried his convictions into the real world. The audience, once tense, now seemed to soften, drawn to Stallone's words. There was a collective sense of respect in the room, the kind that comes from witnessing something genuine, something pure. It was as if Stallone had stripped away the layers of celebrity and revealed the heart of the man beneath. Gregory, clearly searching for something to say, finally managed, "That's admirable, Sly. But why now? After all these years in the spotlight, why turn to this side of life?" Stallone didn't hesitate, "Because the spotlight isn't what defines me. It's what I do when no one's watching that counts. I've always believed in actions over words. You see, Gregory, when you've been through enough battles, the real fight becomes about giving back. The silence that followed was almost deafening. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was reflective. The audience seemed to collectively understand the weight of what Stallone had said. Gregory, for the first time in his career, was rendered speechless. His earlier attempts to undermine Stallone, to expose any weaknesses, had only revealed the strength of a man who didn't need to boast about his achievements. He lived them. As the camera zoomed in on Gregory's face, it was clear that the talk show host had been caught off guard. His usual sharpness had been blunted by the unexpected vulnerability of the conversation. He had asked the questions he thought would break Stallone, but instead, Stallone had turned the interview into a moment of quiet revelation, leaving Gregory to reflect on his approach. Gregory shifted in his seat, looking out at the audience, who were now murmuring amongst themselves. The show had taken an unexpected turn, and it was clear that Stallone had won the battle of words. The media would undoubtedly spin this encounter, but what they wouldn't be able to capture was the calm power of a man who had nothing to prove and yet had shown the world the true measure of his strength. Gregory cleared his throat, realizing the interview was coming to an end. Well, Sly, I think we've all learned something today. You've definitely shown us a different side of yourself. Stallone gave a small smile, one that didn't need words. He had already made his point. The camera focused on him as he spoke his final words, almost as if he were speaking to the world. The real fight, Gregory, Stallone said softly, is about knowing who you are and staying true to it, no matter what the world throws at you. The camera zoomed in on Gregory's face as he sat back, processing Stallone's words. It was clear the legendary actor had just taught him, and everyone watching, a lesson that would stay with them long after the interview had ended. The studio had settled into an eerie quietness after Stallone's words. The camera lingered on Gregory Turner, who now sat back in his chair, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a look of deep reflection. He glanced toward the audience, unsure how to follow up after such an unexpected turn. His typical sharpness and control had been shattered by Stallone's calm strength, and for the first time in his career, Gregory realized the true power of silence and presence. The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. Gone were the sharp, antagonistic tones of the earlier part of the interview. Now, there was a heavy sense of respect, not just from the audience, but from Gregory himself. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He had become the one caught in the web of his own questioning, exposed for his assumptions about Stallone. Gregory cleared his throat again, still grappling with how to proceed. Well, that's certainly a new perspective, he said, his voice lacking its usual bite. He looked directly at Stallone, who remained as poised and composed as ever. For a moment, it seemed like the conversation might come to an awkward end. The audience waited, uncertain of how this rare moment in talk show history would conclude. But just as the silence threatened to stretch on indefinitely, Gregory surprised everyone. "You've got a point, Sly. You've shown me a side of things that's different from what I expected," he admitted, his voice more humble than it had been at the start of the show. He paused, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "I'll be honest, I thought I could push your buttons, get you to react, but you didn't play into it. You stayed grounded, stayed true to yourself." Stallone, ever the gentleman, gave a small nod, a slight smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "Sometimes, the best response is no response at all, Gregory," he said. "The world is full of noise. You don't always need to add to it. It's the quiet moments that reveal who people really are." The camera panned over the audience, catching glimpses of their thoughtful expressions. The usual energy of a talk show had been replaced by a rare moment of introspection. Even the producers in the control room, who had been ready for the usual spats and sound bites, now found themselves watching in silence, unsure of how to break the spell Stallone had cast. Gregory, however, seemed to understand the weight of the moment. He wasn't just hosting a show anymore. He was part of a conversation that was bigger than any ratings war or spectacle. The genuine humanity in Stallone's words had left him shaken, but in a way that was almost comforting. He realized that the world had changed since the days of quick punches and sharp words. The new age, the one Stallone had ushered in with his quiet strength, was about connection, understanding, and authenticity. With a soft sigh, Gregory finally broke the silence, his tone warmer than it had been throughout the interview. "Thank you, Sly. You've certainly made your point, and I think it's one we can all take with us. I'm sure this interview will be remembered for a long time." Stallone's eyes glimmered with understanding, and he offered a final piece of advice. "Sometimes the most important things don't need to be said at all. Let your actions do the talking." The show ended in an entirely different mood than it had started. The crowd's applause, while still loud, felt more genuine, more heartfelt. The usual exit from the set was replaced by a quieter energy, the audience reflecting on the unexpected journey they had just witnessed. As the cameras cut off and the lights began to dim, Gregory stood up slowly, a lingering sense of admiration for the actor he had once considered just another celebrity. Stallone had done something that Gregory didn't think was possible. He had turned the tables, not with grand gestures or forceful words, but with wisdom and composure. And in doing so, he had left Gregory, along with everyone watching, better for it. In the weeks that followed, the interview became a legendary moment in the world of media. Commentators, bloggers, and even critics praised the shift in tone that Stallone had introduced. People spoke of how Gregory's usual sharp edge had been dulled by Stallone's unshakable presence. The hashtag silent strength trended worldwide, and Stallone's quiet wisdom was discussed in newsrooms and living rooms alike. But Gregory? He spent the next few days in quiet contemplation, replaying the interview in his mind. He had always thought of himself as a master of the game, someone who controlled the narrative with a few pointed words. But Stallone had shown him that true control lay not in speaking the loudest, but in knowing when to listen and when to simply be silent. It was a lesson Gregory Turner would never forget. And for Stallone, it was just another day. The hero who had never needed to be the loudest had once again proven that strength, wisdom, and grace are what truly leave a lasting mark.